Imagine a world without mercy. A world where power is absolute, and the line between justice and cruelty is not just blurred, but erased entirely. This was the world of the great ancient empires. Kingdoms forged in conquest and maintained through fear. In the grand theatre of history, punishments were not just about retribution, they were a spectacle, a public declaration of a ruler's dominion over life, and more importantly, over the process of death. And in this grim catalogue of human ingenuity, one name whispers from the past with a unique and chilling resonance. Scaphism, the boats, a method of execution so vile, so drawn out that it seems to crawl directly from the depths of a nightmare. It wasn't designed for a quick end. It wasn't designed for a clean death. It was designed to unmake a human being, piece by piece, while they were still breathing, still thinking, still feeling. The goal was to subject a person to a fate that many would consider worse than death itself, to be slowly, methodically, and consciously consumed alive. Our journey today takes us back 2,500 years to the heart of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. An empire that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Balkans, a superpower of the ancient world. But beneath the veneer of its golden cities and sophisticated bureaucracy lay a capacity for a cruelty that would become legendary. We will dissect the historical accounts, walk through the horrifying mechanics of this torture, and confront the difficult question that has puzzled historians for centuries: did this abomination truly exist? Or is it a ghost? A phantom of propaganda crafted to demonize an entire civilization. This is the story of Scaphism, a tale of milk, honey, and a hell on earth. Before we delve into the gruesome specifics, we must first understand the stage upon which this horror was set. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC, was a marvel of its time. It was an empire of immense wealth, cultural diversity, and administrative genius. The royal road, a sophisticated highway system, connected its vast territories. A standardized currency and a postal service streamlined commerce and communication. Yet, this empire, for all its advancements, was an autocracy. The word of the king, the Shahanshah, or King of Kings, was law. And the law was enforced with an iron fist. Treason, rebellion, or even a grave personal insult to the throne was met with a response that was meant to be both terrifying and unforgettable. Public executions were common across the ancient world, from the crucifixions of Rome to the flayings of Assyria. The purpose was deterrence. A brutal public death served as a warning to all who might consider defying authority. But the Persians, according to their Greek rivals, had a particular flair for the dramatic and the prolonged. They seemed to understand that the fear of pain was a more powerful tool than the release of death. The story of Scaphism comes to us primarily through the pen of one man, Lucius Mestrius Plutarchus, better known as Plutarch. A Greek historian and biographer who lived in the Roman Empire, Plutarch wrote centuries after the events he described. His work, The Life of Artaxerxes II, details a power struggle within the Persian royal family. King Artaxerxes II faced a rebellion from his own younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. In the decisive Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BC, Cyrus was killed. The official story promoted by the king was that he, Artaxerxes, had slain his rebellious brother in single combat. But a young Persian soldier named Mithridates, in the chaos of battle, had allegedly struck the fatal blow without realizing who he was attacking. Later, at a banquet, a drunken Mithridates boasted of his deed, contradicting the king's official narrative. For this transgression, for stealing the king's glory and exposing his lie, Mithridates was condemned, but he wasn't to be simply beheaded or crucified. The king, Plutarch tells us, decreed a special punishment. He would be subjected to scaphism, the word itself. Scaphismos comes from the Greek scaphi, meaning a skiff, a scoop, or a boat. And it is here that the methodical horror begins. Two small boats, or sometimes two hollowed-out tree trunks, were procured. They were designed to fit together, one on top of the other, creating a kind of grotesque, human-sized container. The condemned, like Mithridates, would be laid naked inside the bottom boat. The top boat would then be placed over them, enclosing them completely, leaving only their head, hands, and feet protruding from specially made holes. They were now trapped, immobilized in a cramped, dark space, a coffin from which they could not escape. But this was only the beginning of a process meticulously designed to prolong life in the face of utter decay. The next step was the force feeding. The executioners would bring a mixture of milk and honey, a concoction that sounds almost pleasant, biblical even. But its purpose was monstrous. The victim was forced to ingest vast quantities of this sweet, rich mixture. If they refused, their eyes would be pricked with sharp points until the pain forced them to comply. The immediate effect of this forced diet was twofold. First, the high sugar content would, in theory, keep the victim alive and conscious for longer. The goal was not to starve them, but to sustain them for the ordeal to come. The second, more sinister purpose was to induce violent, uncontrollable diarrhea. Confined within the boat, the victim would soon be lying in their own accumulating filth. The enclosed space would become a septic tank, a breeding ground for what was to come next. While the victim was being corrupted from within, they were also being prepared from the outside. The same mixture of milk and honey was copiously applied to their exposed body parts, their face, their hands, their feet. Every inch of skin left visible to the sun was slathered in the sticky, sweet substance. Then the boat was taken to its final destination. It was often towed into the middle of a stagnant swamp or a marsh, left to bake under the relentless sun. In other accounts, it was simply left in a sun-drenched field. The location was critical. The combination of the hot sun, the stagnant water, and the sweet lure of honey was an irresistible invitation. Soon the insects would arrive. At first it would be the flies and wasps, drawn by the scent of honey. They would swarm the victim's face, crawling into their eyes, nose, and mouth, feeding on the sweet coating the victim, with their hands and body trapped, would be powerless to wave them away. This initial stage was one of maddening torment, a constant, unstoppable irritation. But this was just the overture to the symphony of decay. The true horror of Scaphism lay in its biological timeline. The honey attracted the insects, but the filth inside the boat was what kept them there. The warm, moist, nutrient-rich environment of human waste was the perfect incubator. Flies would land on the victim, not just to feed on the honey, but to lay their eggs in any available orifice and in the festering excrement that surrounded the body. As days turned into a week, the victim, still being force, fed daily to keep them alive and producing more waste, would experience a new level of agony. The insect eggs would hatch. Maggots and worms would begin to teem within the boat, burrowing into the victim's flesh. They would consume the body from the inside out. The diarrhea itself would cause severe skin breakdown, creating open sores and pathways for infection. The insects, carrying bacteria from the filth, would crawl into these wounds. Gangrene would set in. The victim's flesh would begin to rot, to putrefy, while their heart was still beating. They would feel the crawling, the burrowing, the gnawing consumption of their own body. Imagine the sensory experience. The constant buzzing of flies, the scorching heat of the sun, the unbearable stench of honey, sweat, excrement, and rotting flesh, the feeling of thousands of tiny mouths devouring you, not after you are dead, but as the very process of your dying. Delirium would inevitably set in, a feverish haze fueled by dehydration, sepsis, and unimaginable pain. Yet the daily ritual would continue. The executioners would arrive with more milk and honey, a cruel act of life-sustaining torture, ensuring the process didn't end prematurely. Plutarch claims that Mithridates, The unfortunate boaster endured this for 17 days. 17 days of being consciously eaten alive, 17 days of lying in a coffin of his own filth, a living feast for the vermin of the swamp. Eventually, after a period of suffering almost impossible for a modern mind to comprehend, the body would succumb. The nervous system would shut down, the organs would fail from septic shock, and the heart would finally stop. Death would come as a merciful release long after the individual had been reduced to a barely living, rotting husk. When the ordeal was finally over, the top boat would be removed to reveal the proof of the punishment's efficacy. The flesh, according to the accounts, would be entirely consumed, with only the skeleton remaining, swarmed by a writhing mass of vermin that had made a home of the victim's body. It is a story of unparalleled horror. It combines multiple primal fears: the fear of being trapped, the fear of insects, the loss of control and dignity, and the terror of a slow, agonizing death. But as we step back from the visceral horror, we must put on the cap of the historian and ask the critical question: is any of it true? The power of the story is undeniable, but its historical authenticity is a matter of intense debate. The primary source, as we've established, is Plutarch. This is the first and most significant problem. Plutarch was a Greek writing under the Roman Empire about the Persians for centuries. The Greeks and Persians were geopolitical rivals. Greek literature, from Herodotus to Aeschylus, is filled with depictions of the Persians as decadent, effeminate, and cruel, a direct contrast to the Greek self-image of being rational, virtuous, and courageous. This trope is known as Orientalism, portraying the East as a strange, exotic, and often barbaric. Could Scaphism be a part of this tradition? A piece of masterful propaganda designed to horrify a Greek audience and reinforce their sense of cultural superiority? It is a strong possibility. Plutarch was writing nearly 500 years after the Battle of Cunaxa. He wasn't a contemporary witness. He was relying on earlier sources, most notably Ctesias of Cnidus. Ctesias was a Greek physician who actually served in the court of Artaxerxes II. He would have been a direct contemporary, an eyewitness to the events. This seems to lend credibility, but there is a catch. The works of Ctesias are almost entirely lost. We only know of them through summaries and quotes from later authors like Plutarch. And Ctesias himself had a reputation, even in antiquity, for being a teller of tall tales. He was known for embellishing his accounts to make them more dramatic and entertaining. He was, in a sense, more of a sensationalist journalist than a sober historian. So, our main source is a later historian quoting a notoriously unreliable eyewitness. This is shaky ground. The second major piece of evidence against Scaphism is perhaps the most damning: a complete lack of Persian sources. We have Persian records, cuneiform tablets, and royal inscriptions. None of them mention this punishment. If this was a recognized, official form of execution, especially one used on a high-profile political offender, one would expect some record of it, some law prescribing it, some mention of it in their own administrative or historical texts. There is silence. The Persians were certainly not shy about recording their military victories or their king's edicts. Their silence on Scaphism is profound and deeply suspicious. It suggests that this was something known to the Greeks, but not to the Persians themselves. The story is further echoed by later writers, such as the 12th century Byzantine chronicler Joannes Zonaras, but he appears to be simply repeating Plutarch's account, adding little new information. The story gets passed down, repeated, and perhaps embellished, but it all traces back to that single questionable origin. So, should we dismiss it entirely as a Greek fabrication? A historical horror story? It is not that simple. We must also consider the argument for its plausibility. While the story is sensational, the biological mechanics are, unfortunately, entirely feasible. Force feeding is a known practice. The effects of a high-sugar diet and induced diarrhea are well understood. The attraction of insects to sweet substances and decaying organic matter is a fact of nature. The process of decomposition and infestation by maggots is a grim reality studied by forensic entomologists. Nothing in the description of Scaphism is, from a purely biological standpoint, impossible. It is an elaborate and resource-intensive method, to be sure, but not beyond the capabilities of an ancient state. Furthermore, the Achaemenid Empire was known for some genuinely brutal and inventive punishments. The historical record, including Persian sources, does confirm practices like mutilation, cutting off noses and ears, blinding, and impalement. Herodotus describes a punishment where a person was buried alive, leaving only their head above ground, which bears some resemblance to the confinement aspect of Scaphism. Another punishment involved being executed between two massive stones. Given this documented context of extreme cruelty, is it really such a stretch to believe that a punishment like Scaphism could have been conceived and carried out, even if only on rare, specific occasions for enemies of the state? The truth, as is often the case in ancient history, likely lies somewhere in the murky middle. Perhaps Scaphism was not a standard codified punishment, but a one-off act of extreme cruelty inflicted by a vengeful king on a man who had publicly shamed him. A singular event so horrific that its story was picked up by Ctesias, embellished for his Greek audience, and later immortalized by Plutarch. Or perhaps it is a composite story, a blending of several different Persian punishments into one ultimate horror story. The confinement of being buried alive, the slow death of being left for wild animals, and the indignity of being covered in filth could have all been melded together by Greek storytellers into the singular, unforgettable narrative of the boats. The verdict of most modern historians is one of profound skepticism. Without a single piece of corroborating evidence from Persian sources, and given the clear propagandistic value of the story, Scaphism is generally considered to be more legend than fact. It's a powerful myth, a historical urban legend that tells us more about Greco-Persian relations and the Greek imagination than it does about the Persian justice system. And yet, the question of its reality almost becomes secondary to another, more compelling question. Why has this story survived? Why? Out of all the countless tales of ancient cruelty, does Scaphism hold such a powerful grip on our collective imagination? The answer lies in the profound psychological horror it represents. Scaphism is a masterpiece of terror because it systematically attacks the very foundations of human identity and dignity. First, there is the total loss of autonomy. The victim is completely immobilized, unable to move, unable to defend themselves, unable to even control their own bodily functions. They are reduced from a person to a passive object, a vessel for suffering. This helplessness is a core human fear. Then there is the violation of the body's sanctity. The body is not just harmed from the outside, it is corrupted from within by the forced feeding and then consumed bit by bit. It becomes a foreign landscape, a host for a parasitic invasion. The line between self and other dissolves as the body becomes a teeming ecosystem of decay. This taps into our deep-seated fear of contamination and bodily invasion. The pacing of the torture is also key. It is not a swift, violent end. It is a slow, creeping process of unraveling. The victim is given days, even weeks, to contemplate their fate, to feel every stage of their own decomposition. They are a conscious witness to their own demise. This protracted timeline transforms it from a mere execution into a form of living hell, a period of suffering so extended it defies comprehension. Finally, it combines the natural with the unnatural in a uniquely terrifying way. It uses milk and honey, substances associated with life, nourishment, and sweetness as instruments of defilement and death. It turns the natural process of insect life into an engine of torture. It perverts the very cycles of nature to create an experience that is profoundly unnatural. This combination of elements makes Scaphism a perfect storm of horror. It doesn't just kill the body, it dismantles the mind and annihilates the spirit. It is a story that has echoed through the centuries, finding its way into literature, art, and even modern horror films. It serves as a benchmark for ultimate suffering, a shorthand for the worst possible fate. When we want to describe something as truly hellish, we might unknowingly be invoking the ghost of Scaphism. So, what do we take away from the tale of the boats? We are left with a chilling story that is almost certainly an exaggeration, if not a complete fabrication. We are left with a powerful piece of ancient propaganda that successfully painted an empire as the epitome of barbarism. But we are also left with a profound insight into the nature of fear. The story of Scaphism persists not because it is historically proven, but because it feels true on a primal psychological level. It is a reflection of our deepest anxieties about helplessness, decay, and the loss of self. It reminds us of the terrifying creativity that humans can possess when it comes to inflicting pain. Whether or not a Persian soldier named Mithridates ever truly died in a boat of milk and honey, the legend of his fate serves as a dark monument. It stands as a testament to the power of stories to shape our understanding of the past and to articulate our most profound fears. It is a grotesque echo from a distant time, a warning of the depths to which humanity can sink, and a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not those from myths or legends, but those we find within the pages of our own history. The boat may have been a fiction, but the horror it represents is very, very real. It floats silently on the dark waters of human memory, a symbol of a fate where death is not the punishment, but the final, desperate prayer.